Very good morning. My name is Bindu and I'm the host of this session. It's my pleasure to welcome a very special guest at our MBA Spotlight Fair here today. We have Travis with us. He was a visa officer for 6 years and now practices law as an immigration attorney. Travis now specializes in consular processing issues, helping applicants prepare for their visa interviews and navigate related complexities and delays. Travis often advises other immigration attorneys so they may be better support for their clients. Today, we'll start with a brief overview by Travis touching the student visa process, H-1B, immigration concerns, and then we'll open up for the Q&A. If you have questions, please locate the Q&A bubbles on your screen on the right and submit your questions. You can also upload questions others ask. We'll start with the most upvoted questions first. Again, it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Travis. Travis, we can't hear you. I think mic issue again.
Able to hear me
Yes.
now?
Hey, Travis, welcome again. We are able to hear you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, sorry about that. It wouldn't be a great presentation without some technical difficulties, right?
Yeah.
Okay, as I was trying to say a minute ago, thank you, Bindo. It's an honor to be here with you and with everybody that has tuned in. I'm excited to go through some information on student visas for all of you. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And let's jump into it. As Bindu mentioned, I am a lawyer, and so of course I have to start a presentation with a nice legal disclaimer here. But this is actually very important. The purpose of this session is to offer some insights and even some tips about the student visa process. But this session is not meant to be legal advice. And so I will try to take as many questions as we have time for. But I apologize in advance if I have to say, look, that's really actually more specific legal advice. And if that is the case, I may advise you to reach out to a qualified immigration attorney. This is actually, as you'll see when we start going through these slides, this process is very important. So don't leave this to chance. Don't try to rely on something that you find online. I do urge you to field your questions with a qualified expert. And with that in mind, as an immigration lawyer, I have dedicated my career, along with my partner Mandy, to helping visa applicants navigate through this highly complex visa process. We have a law firm called John Feuerbacher Visa and Immigration, where we help applicants navigate through this process with one-on-one practice or mock interviews. And then we can help applicants who have specific complications. Maybe they have been arrested before. Maybe they've been refused a few times before. Maybe they're stuck in a delay, something generally called administrative processing. If you find yourself in any of these situations, or if you just have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can go to our website and schedule a meeting with us, or you can send us an email to the address on the screen. Now, we also have launched a series of highly detailed and comprehensive self-service online guides. So at zfvisaguides.com, you will see an online course dedicated to the DS-160, which is the online visa application form. I'll talk more about that in a moment. We have a course that is specifically dedicated to the interview itself, the visa interview, that is. And then we have a complete guide, which covers everything from the very beginning, when you get your official I-20 document and you review that and you fill out the DS-160, you go to your interview. This covers potential complications during the process and how to navigate through complications that maybe aren't avoidable. And with that complete course, you will also unlock access to either myself or my partner, Mandy. Both of us are immigration lawyers and former visa officers, so that we can answer any remaining visa questions that you have. So keep that in mind, and let's jump into it. I've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible so that we can save as much time as possible to answer your questions. But I want to start by going through just at a very high level the F1 visa process. It is actually a fairly extensive and complicated process. And so I want to give you an initial idea of what to expect. Then I'll go through some tips to help you prepare for your interview, the most crucial step of the journey. Then I want to dispel a couple of myths that you've either already probably stumbled upon online or you are likely to stumble upon online. And then we'll talk about what to do if you've been denied previously, and we'll take some questions and answers. So, the overall visa process. I've distilled this down into 5 general steps, but it is more detailed than this. And so, I actually would suggest that you go to our website, ZF Visa Guides, where you can download a free F1 process roadmap. You'll see all of these steps in much more detail, along with links to official government websites for more information. So what I'm going to go through now is again a very high level. It's not meant to be exhaustive or totally comprehensive. This journey generally begins with your decision of where you want to go to school. And so in the application process, hopefully you've been offered a spot at one or maybe more than one school. And when you are making the decision of where to go to school, amongst all of your other considerations, I would suggest that you think about how you're going to pay for the education. Everybody, including visa officers, are highly aware that education in the United States is very expensive. And visa officers will be interested in understanding how exactly you plan to pay for your education. So before you move forward, you should start thinking about a concrete plan to fund your education. And you should be able to explain that clearly by the time you get to your visa interview. Now, once you have decided on a school, that school will generally register you in a government system. It's called SEVIS for short, which stands for the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. And what that essentially does is it gives the school the ability to generate an official document called the I-20 form, which is your proof not only for your visa interview, but also for the customs officials when you enter the United States that you are going to a specific school, that you are studying a specific topic, that you either already speak enough English for the program or that you're going to study English. And it also indicates when the program that you're going to attend, when it begins and when it ends. So check that form, make sure it's accurate because everybody, is prone to make mistakes from now and then. So make sure it's accurate, and then you'll pay a fee. It's called the SEVIS fee. And again, more details can be found online about this. Now, the next step is really your first step in your visa journey. And that is where you will go online to fill out an online application form. It's called the DS 160. I recommend that you do this yourself. Do not hire an agent to do this for you. Agents are generally not likely to focus on details. They are prone to errors, and even minor errors can cause drastic complications in your visa application process. So fill out this form yourself, answer everything honestly, and check all of your answers before you submit the form, because once you submit the form online, you can't go back and change anything. Now, the next step is the interview itself. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the most crucial milestone of your journey. I recommend that you schedule the interview as close to home as possible to avoid any unnecessary concerns, and that you schedule it as early as possible. Remember that you can get your student visa up to 1 year before you plan to start your class. And I will talk a little bit more about the potential for delays. And so, to avoid any unnecessary complications and possibly even having to delay your start of class, schedule that interview as early as you can. That is a great rule of thumb to remember as you move forward. And then finally, assuming you've been approved, you travel to the United States. When you go to the United States, remember that you can't go more than 30 days before the program start date listed on your I-20 form. And remember that you need to bring your I-20 document with you. That's something that the Customs and Border Protection agent will want to see when you try to enter the country. So don't put it in your checked baggage because that may cause delay. So I mentioned that you should schedule your interview as early as possible. One of the key reasons for that is that we are seeing a rising refusal and delay rate for F1 student visas. I don't say this to scare you, but I do say it to really highlight the fact that it is important to apply as early as you can. Last year in 2023, we saw more than 1 in 3 student applicants either face a denial or a significant delay at their visa interview. And as you're probably thinking, any delay, if you're planning to go study on a certain date, may as well just be a denial because you may have to delay your start of class if you're delayed. And so, how do you avoid falling into this 36% figure here? Well, let me give you some tips for your interview. And of course, we can go into more detail on these when I take your questions in a moment as well. Now, the most important thing to remember in your interview is that this is what I call an exercise in trust. Your visa officer will be trying to determine before they go into any other consideration, they'll be trying to determine if you are honest, if you are credible. So if you try to cover up anything, if you try to hide anything, if you try to tweak a fact or a detail, if the visa officer picks up on that, that's likely to be the end of your interview and you will be denied and you might even be punished if the officer thinks you were lying. So assume that the officer already knows everything about you, be extremely honest, and then while you're telling the truth, it's also important to be authentic. Now, for any of you that know much about American culture, we are very expressive. We're passionate. We express our feelings, our passions, our angers. We complain. We brag. We don't hide much. And visa officers, as American human beings, sort of expect everybody else to behave the same way, whether that's fair or unfair. But I say that because the more authentic, the more personal you can be during your interview, the higher your chance of success will be. Because the law actually places the responsibility on your shoulders as the applicant to explain to the visa officer why you deserve the visa. And so the more detail you can offer and the more personal you can appear, the more that officer will understand what's driving you to make these decisions, and the more likely they are to both believe you and eventually approve your application. And so I always recommend that you think about proactively volunteering some details about your situation. Think about explaining where you're going to school, what you will study, and why you've decided to go to that school and study that topic or try to attain that specific degree. And then think about how you're going to pay for the school. And then, perhaps most importantly, what are you going to do after you graduate? How is this degree going to help you in your career or your life goals? And focus on how it's going to help you back at home. Because another key requirement for a student visa is that you are going to depart the United States after your studies conclude. So, explaining what you're planning to do after you graduate back at home will help you hopefully be approved as well. I also recommend that you speak English. Now, this is not a legal requirement, but a visa officer will be wondering and will be trying to determine if you can actually progress and graduate at the end of your studies in the United States. Now, our classes are generally taught in English. And so, if you're not able or not willing to speak English during your interview, your officer might question whether you can actually study and be a real student in the United States. Even if you're planning to take some English courses when you arrive in the United States, try to speak as much English as you can during the interview because it will give the officer more confidence to approve you. And then finally, don't rely on documents. Documents can be useful. Sometimes officers will ask you for documents, but in your interview, focus on answering the officer's questions. more than trying to shove documents at the officer, because that's not the point of a face to face discussion. So, with that out of the way, let me touch on a couple of common myths. And I want to kind of set the record straight here. These are some myths that are often floating around on the internet. Our clients often ask us these questions. So, let me just be very clear in a couple of points. And hopefully, this will help you as you go through your visa journey. So, first, we hear all the time visa officers love denying applications. And as a related topic, visa officers have some sort of quota where they need to deny a certain number of applications every day or week or month. This is absolutely not true. I can tell you the reason that I have dedicated my life to helping applicants now is because I, like almost every other visa officer, hated denying applicants, especially when I encountered an applicant that really might have qualified for a visa, but they were simply so unprepared to answer my questions and explain their situation that the law really left me with no other choice. Visa officers understand that this is a major milestone in your life. They don't want to deny you if you really might deserve a visa. So that is simply not true. Now, as I mentioned a second ago, it is really your responsibility as an applicant to explain your situation and demonstrate for your visa officer why you deserve a visa. And so a lot of agents will suggest that you offer a very short or even a one word answer. And I'll tell you right now that that is a way to be denied because you're not making the visa officer's job easier. You should be helping them understand who you are by explaining your decisions, why you're going to this school, why you're studying this particular topic, what you're going to do after you graduate. And if you don't take the opportunity to explain yourself, the officer might simply run out of time, become impatient, and decide to deny you. And then one more myth here. We hear all the time the officer has already decided my case before the interview even begins. This is not only wrong, it's actually not even possible. The officer doesn't have access to any information about you until the interview begins. They're either going to start your interview by scanning a barcode on a piece of paper that you bring with you, or your case will pop up as part of a batch when you approach the window. And it is only at that point that the officer starts to review the responses you provide to your DS 160 and other details of the system. And it is really not until they start asking you questions that they know what they're going to do, whether it's approve or deny. And so I mention this because the interview really is your opportunity to put your best foot forward and hopefully convince the officer to approve you. So preparation is key. But, and this is the last thing I'll go through before some questions. If you are denied, first of all, generally speaking, this is not the end of the world. You can generally reapply at any time. If you were denied under a section of law called 214B, or commonly referred to as 214B, this is not a permanent punishment or ineligibility. You can turn around and schedule another interview. If you do so, first of all, I recommend that you interview at the same location to avoid an unnecessary concern that you're just shopping around for a better outcome. The same visa officer should not interview you again. So if you approach the window and you see the same person that denied you last time, just politely ask if you can go to a different window. This is an internal regulation that visa officers have to follow anyway, so they will be grateful that you're saving their time by noting this early. And then think about what has changed since your last interview. If some time has passed, you may have been promoted at your job, you may have gotten married, you may have had all sorts of other changes that you could explain. But if you're really thinking about this and nothing appears to have changed, you're going to the same school, you're studying the same thing, your life is really in the same position it was in your last interview. Think about what you maybe didn't explain clearly in your last interview and focus on that at your next interview. Think about how you can maybe go deeper in why you've chosen to study this topic or why you've chosen a particular school. And then explain that more clearly if you are faced with this question: what has changed since your last interview? So, with that, I do urge all of you to tune into our YouTube channel, ZF Visa. We offer almost weekly, sometimes more often than that, videos that go into all different aspects of the visa process. And finally, for those of you who have stayed awake through my presentation here, I'm excited to offer you all a 15% discount on our complete F1 course. If you go to zfvisaguides.com, you select the complete F1 guide, enter the coupon code GMAT Club MBA F1 at checkout, and you'll see a 15% discount applied. So I will stop sharing my screen, and Bindu, if we can take some questions,
Yeah. Thank you
that'd be
so much,
great.
Travis. It is a wonderful session, and you really provided with very valuable information here. So we have lots of questions come up. The first one is, now that we have Trump as president elect, how much decline do you think we'll see in the H-1B approvals?
This is $1 million question, Saeed, and it's something that not only I, but the rest of the immigration law community is following intently. First of all, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but I can tell you that there are some very troubling signs. If you haven't noticed, President elect Trump has appointed Stephen Miller as his deputy chief of staff for policy. And he was the architect of the so-called Muslim ban, as well as many other, kind of troubling immigration policies. So, what I think will probably happen is we may see lower caps on H-1Bs. And even if that doesn't happen, we may see a funding cut to the State Department, to USCIS, to other agencies that might result in longer wait times to schedule an interview. There may be increased scrutiny at the interview, which might result in additional delays. This could really go in a number of different directions. And so it really does go back to what I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. It is highly important to apply as early as possible, no matter what visa you're seeking. And as I also mentioned, make sure you apply at home. That's not only because you will be subject to maybe less scrutiny during the interview, but also if you are subjected to a delay, to what's commonly referred to as administrative processing, at least you're at home and you're not stuck in a foreign country where you may not have authorization to remain very long. You may not have any family or other support system. Really plan for these contingencies that this could be a couple of month process. So I hope that answers your question as much as we can at this point.
We have next question. So, how do we justify solid ties to our own country in the interview when we could have incurred dollars in loans, which can only be repaid in the same currency, because repaying in any other currency would really kill the purpose of getting an MBA?
That's a good question. So I would actually not focus on repaying the loan as much as I would focus on your plans after graduation. And so as an example here, I'm really excited to get an MBA because I've been working in finance for the last 3 years. My employer has, told me that I might be a really good candidate for a promotion to a director role. But before I can qualify for that promotion, I need an advanced degree. And an MBA with a focus on finance would really help me, build some specific skills that I need. And so if you focus on an explanation like that, again, don't copy my words here. This should be specific to your situation. But that's a much more compelling way of explaining to the officer that you do have a roadmap charted out. You've got a plan to use this degree after you graduate. That plan involves you going back home. And so that's a better kind of tie to your home than talking about how you might repay a loan.
Okay, so let's see our next question. If someone is on an H1B already and starts an MBA program, can they switch to an F1? Also, on graduating and starting a job, could you switch back to H1B again?
So this is actually a pretty nuanced question, and I apologize, but this is where I would say you should talk to an immigration lawyer. There are instances where some of this might be possible, but there may be some additional concerns, and I would want you to weigh some pros and cons of how you might proceed. And so I don't really want to get into that here. It's not really the right forum.
Okay. Next question is, as an Iranian applying for AI ML studies in the US with potential funding, will my visa or background check take longer due to my nationality?
It could, but that could be due to a number of reasons, not necessarily because of your background or your nationality. To be very clear, any student is potentially subject to what's commonly referred to as a checking process. So, what I recommend is, again, a little bit of a broken record, apply as early as you can because you might experience a delay. But when you go into your interview, especially if you have done any advanced research or you're planning to do any advanced research, or if maybe you have any sort of academic journal publications, bring a couple of things with you to avoid a delay. And those documents would include your resume or CV, your advisor's resume or CV, your study plan, including the specific research that you're planning to undertake, and your list of publications. And finally, your advisor's list of publications. There is no way to avoid being subject to this checking process, but if you bring these documents with you, you can significantly minimize delay. If you don't bring these documents, your visa officer is likely to ask for them. You'll then have to go home, email them to the embassy or consulate, and that can result in several weeks of delay while the officer reviews it and decides what to do. So it's always best to come overly prepared at your interview with these documents.
Thank you, Travis, for answering that.
Mhm.
We have our next question. Does saying that you want to work in US after the studies hurt the chances of approval?
Not necessarily, but this is a little nuanced. So I'll try to explain this quickly and succinctly here. Remember, I mentioned that the student visa, it's a non-immigrant visa. And what that means is that it's essentially a ticket into the country so that you can study and then maybe do some OPT or CPT work if that's been authorized. But after that, after you graduate and after your OPT concludes, you actually have to leave the United States. Or at least your visa officer has to be confident that you have some compelling reason or reasons to leave the United States after you graduate. It's what we call your ties to home. And so, if your plan after graduation is not to leave the United States, that could kind of hurt this understanding that you have some sort of reason to leave. And so, what you might think about here, and first of all, let me be very clear, you should never lie in your visa interview. 100% honesty is key. If your real plan is to work in the United States, don't hide that. But if you're kind of on the fence or you don't really know what you're going to do, focus on what your plan might be if you can't work in the United States. Maybe you're unable to find a company to sponsor you for a work visa, or you're just simply unable to find a job in the United States. What will that mean for your future plans back at home? And that's what I would focus on in your interview. Now, while you're going through your MBA program or whatever program you're going through, you might be offered a job, you might get an H-1B work visa, and if that happens, congratulations. Plans change over time. But at your visa interview, I would suggest that you focus on your plan back at home.
All right. Uh, our next question is, my knowledge of the F1 student visa process is just like a beginner. So, what would you suggest a person like me should rely only on the US Embassy website, or are there any other free resources available for in depth information?
Yeah, this is a really good question. There is a lot, there's a tremendous amount of false information online. There are people who know nothing about the process who pass themselves off as experts. There are people who say that they can guarantee visa results. And let me be very clear, nobody can guarantee a visa result because only the visa officer is making this decision. So I would start with the US Embassy and the US State Department websites. That is really the only information that you can be 100% sure is accurate. The other thing I would suggest is download our free F1 process roadmap. Again, if you go to zfvisaguides.com, you can download that for free. And if you are interested in additional help, consider one of our courses. But be very careful, reading community message boards, messages on WhatsApp groups, even a recap from a friend who's gone through the process. Misinformation can be very detrimental to your visa journey. And even small mistakes in understanding can lead to denials and even bigger complications. So, yes, certainly start with official embassy and State Department websites.
Okay, so we'll go on to our next question. What if we plan to work in US while studying part-time and after graduation full-time?
You might be able to, but this is where you should talk to your school administration. Start with the DSO, the designated school official, who is generally the person or the team that has signed your I-20 form. And actually, you should set up a meeting with the international student team anyway. Get to know them because they will help you navigate through a host of questions you have before you arrive, during your program, and even after you graduate. So get to know them, be their friend. And then this is a question to ask them. Ask them what kinds of jobs you might find. You will generally need to go through some sort of authorization process. You'll have to apply for permission to work. There are restrictions on the types of positions you can have, how much or how little you can work. And so use the guidance from your school as your tool to make sure that you don't run afoul of any visa regulations. And if you still have questions, reach out to an immigration lawyer for help.
Moving on to our next question. How can one go about getting visa to learn outside the country, especially if the individual is from Nigeria?
So I'm assuming you mean outside of the country, meaning in the United States. If that's the case, then go through kind of the websites we mentioned, the guides we mentioned. If you're talking about a visa to study outside of the United States, I think a good place to start would again be that international student team at your school. Many universities have study abroad opportunities, they have relationships with other universities around the world, and they're a good starting point to help you navigate through visa requirements and other steps to make that a reality.
So, our next question is, does applying with a spouse or sibling help if both of us want to pursue an MBA?
This is an interesting question. I would generally recommend that you apply separately and you focus on your individual plans. And that's not because you might be denied if you apply together. It just might be a little bit more complicated for the visa officer to understand what each of you individually are planning to do if you're standing there together. Now, one word of advice here: if and when you apply separately, make sure that you explain that you are traveling with your spouse. There will be questions in your DS 160 application form about, who are you traveling with? And in your interview, if you're asked about this, be honest. Because if you hide this fact for whatever reason, and you say something like, no, I'm going by myself, my wife or my husband are staying at home, well, when your spouse turns around to either apply for their visa, or maybe when you show up at an airport ready to enter the country, well, Customs and Border Protection, other State Department officials, everybody may have access to notes in the system where you said you were going by yourself. And that will almost certainly result in complications. So, again, the best advice I can give you for almost all of these questions is just be honest about everything.
Right. So our next question is, I would like to know if there's consideration for admitting mature applications to US universities, MS and MBA with a prior rejection track record, 15 years experience as an accounting background and nonprofit community service.
Great question. First of all, for MBA programs specifically, it's generally understood that having a gap between university and starting the MBA program is more or less normal. And then for other master's programs, this is also, not uncommon. And so, what I would recommend is, first of all, this shouldn't be a major issue, but you should think about explaining what you've done between the time you graduated university and now. How has your career progressed? And also, what have you maybe done to prepare for this new educational degree? Have you studied English? Have you taken the GMAT test? Have you talked to potential employers about job prospects once you have that master's degree or MBA degree? And explain that during your interview, because then again, you're demonstrating to the visa officer that you are a credible student. You've made a clear decision on why you're studying now, why you're going back to school now. And you're also using that as an opportunity to explain what you're going to do after you graduate. How this degree will help you in your career path or achieve your life goals.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. I have an open permanent residency application for Canada still in process. Could this affect my US student visa application?
It could, but this is not something I would necessarily worry a lot about. Now, again, I know that I've said this many times, but honesty is key here. So if you are asked about this open application, be honest about it. Otherwise, my recommendation would just be to focus on your plans in the United States with your school and explain what you're going to do after you graduate. Now, if your plan is to move to Canada after you graduate and find a job there, you might want to explain that. Because again, the law doesn't require that you go back specifically to your home. It just requires essentially that you're leaving the country when your student status expires. And so, if your path is going to lead you maybe to Canada, this actually might be something that could help your qualifications.
All right. So we have a next question. What are the major pitfalls for student visa denial?
Excellent question, Juliet. Let me give you just a couple here. First and foremost, it's lack of preparation. And interestingly, this affects people that maybe aren't very qualified, but it also affects some of the most highly qualified applicants. And the reason I think that is because many people view the interview as just another step in the process. It's just another box to tick off. And so they think, look, I've been accepted to a great school. I don't really need to worry about this. I just have to show up to the interview, get my visa, and then I can go. And what tends to happen in these situations is these applicants are completely unprepared to explain anything. What they're doing in the United States, why they've made this decision, what they're doing after they graduate. And remember, the law requires you as the applicant to demonstrate why you deserve the visa. And so I think the biggest pitfall here is simply lack of preparation, lack of an understanding of how the process works and what you need to do to put yourself in a position for success. Now, a corollary to that is an inability or maybe just unwillingness to volunteer details. And I'll give you just a quick example here. This is something that happened to me all the time as a visa officer. I would say something like, where are you planning to study in the United States? The response would be New York. Okay, what school? NYU. What are you going to study? Master's degree. By now, I've already asked three questions, and I know nothing about this individual. I really don't know what they're studying. I know a school, I know a level of a degree, but I don't know why they're studying in the United States. I don't know why they're excited to go to NYU. I don't know what this degree is going to do for them. And so, with every additional question the visa officer asks, they're getting a little bit more impatient. They're getting a little bit more emotionally drained. And that's not what you want. So consider this relationship with your visa officer to be a partnership, not an adversarial relationship. Think about how you can make the officer's life easier. And you do that first and foremost by explaining yourself, not by offering one word answers and only specifically answering a question the officer asks, but instead by treating it more as a conversation where you're explaining your decisions, what you're going to study, why you're excited about it, what you're going to do afterwards. And that will help you succeed much more than anything else will. And then the final thing here, being doing, we can go to the next question, I promise, is honesty. Even minor discrepancies in a DS 160 response or a verbal response during the interview, if the visa officer concludes that they can't really trust what you're saying, that's the end. And so again, if everybody has something in their past that maybe they're not super proud of, I get that, we're all human, but don't cover it up. It's better to be forthcoming with everything in your past, everything in your present, all of your future plans, because if the officer finds that they can't believe you, then you're done and you're going to have to start all over again.
That is pretty informative. And we have a next question. So I got rejected twice this summer. I don't know why. I had a quite large amount of scholarship
Mm.
from top 100 business schools. I even had sponsor to cover my tuition and living expenses. Are these two rejects going to affect in my next year trip?
Well, so let me briefly talk about what happens in the denial, and I'm really sorry to hear about this. This sounds like uh, potentially the wrong decision, especially because you have a scholarship, which is a great detail to share during your interview, because it shows that your school is not only excited to accept you, but they're actually accepting a discount on what you're going to pay them. That's how badly they want you to go to their school. So that's usually a very, very good sign. A couple of things about denials. So every time you go in for a visa interview, your officer will type in some notes justifying their decision, whether it's to approve you or deny you. And then at your next interview, the first thing or one of the first things your next officer will see are the notes from your previous interviews. And so a denial can sort of poison the well, to use an American phrase, by essentially putting negative details in front of your officer before they even begin the interview, before they start asking you questions. And so, yes, these denials will affect your next application. And this is why it's even more crucial after a denial or a couple of denials to make sure you are fully prepared to communicate effectively with your officer and explain your decision, your plans in great detail. This is where I would urge you to consult an immigration lawyer, maybe consult our online course, because now the interview is even more crucial than it was, because you're going to have to break out of this kind of negative set of details if you're going to be successful.
All right. So we have one more question. Probably we can take up. There are lots of questions, but yeah.
Sorry, we can't get to them all.
Yeah. Are there any country lists like the countries of particular concern that have higher chances of being refused?
So this is actually available on the State Department's website. There are visa statistics where you can look at the refusal rates country by country. And I will say that they vary widely. There are some countries where you're seeing almost a 90% refusal rate, where others have maybe a 10% refusal rate. And that's due to a host of factors. There could be a high rate of fraud in certain countries. Visa officers may see lots of fake bank statements, for example, or applicants that just aren't telling the truth, or they're hiring agents that are advising them to lie. It could be due to a number of reasons. And so, if you find yourself in a country with a high refusal rate, remember, this does not mean that you will be denied. But what it does mean is that you may have a little bit more difficulty establishing your credibility and then, proving to your visa officer that you deserve the visa.
All right. So, with that question, we are about time. And thank you so much, Travis, for being here with us today and sharing such valuable and important information during the spotlight. Your insights have been incredibly helpful, and we truly appreciate the time and effort you have taken us to guide us. Also, a big thank you for offering us the 15% discount on the complete F1 guide. It's such a generous gesture from your end, and I'm sure that it's going to be of huge help to many of us.
I sure hope so. Thanks, Bindu, for hosting, and thank you, everybody, for joining. I wish you all the best in your journey, and hopefully you get to realize your goal of studying here in the United States.